I don't have a vitae of Dr. Zingaro, but he's everything you want to have in a psychologist plus. And today, we're very happy to have Joe here and to pass on to us some information that is going to be very valuable to all of us. Joe.
So, I'm a psychologist. I graduated from Penn State. A little background is that my first degree was in elementary education.
Yay.
So I taught fourth grade for a few years. I loved it because fourth graders are smaller than me. They're not smart Alex. They love their teacher. I got more cologne those Christmases than you can count on. So after I taught for a few years, I went into elementary school counseling. So I got an additional degree at Slippery Rock University, got a master's degree in counseling, went to Zingaro, Pennsylvania, and worked for 3 years there as an elementary school counselor. While I was doing that, I went to Bucknell University and got a certificate in school psychology. And a buddy of mine, we had met at Slippery Rock, was living in State College, PA, and invited my family and his family to get together for a weekend. We get together for a weekend, and we go into the campus. He and I went onto the campus. We went into the Cedar Building, which is where the Department of Psychology is. And this is the truth. My life was so wonderful because I didn't plan any of it. So we walk into the Cedar Building, and on this table is an application to go to their psych department. His name was Joe. He said, "Joe, why don't you pick it up and sign it?" So I took it home. I filled it out, sent it in. I get a letter. They want to interview me. I went for the interview. They accept 8 people a year at Penn State. I was number 9. Somebody dropped out early August. I got accepted into the program. Psychologists want to go to programs that are approved by the American Psychological Association. It's a credentialing agency. Penn State Counseling Psych Department was not approved by the American Psychological Association when I got accepted. Thank goodness. That next year, we applied, we got accepted, and I got a graduate assistantship, so I was in charge of screening the new applicants. I could never have gotten into Penn State because they raised the bar so high. Once it was AP approved, but it was retroactive to anybody in the program.
Oh, my word.
Yeah. Yeah. So I graduated from Penn State. I did my internship at the Astor Home for Children, which is in Poughkeepsie, New York. So I lived there for a year. This was working with very traumatized kids, primarily from inner city New York. So these are children 5 to 12. Their average length of stay in this hospital is 2 years. So again, these are children that are just really struggling, and everything was against them. Their environments, the schools, it was just really tough. While I was in New York, I was writing my dissertation, so I was really kind of getting fried. And my sister, who worked at Old Dominion University, rented a house in the Outer Banks, North Carolina, for a week and said, "If you and your wife can come down here for a week, you can have this place. No cost. Just come on down and join me." So we go from Poughkeepsie to the Outer Banks, but the halfway point, the halfway point was Dover, Delaware. I had never been in Delaware. So we stopped at Dover. Our child was only 4 at the time, so we get a hotel, we spend the night, let him rest. Next day we go to the Outer Banks, come back from the Outer Banks, stop at Dover again, because it seemed like a nice little town, and then go back to New York. The next week there was an ad in the paper in New York for a job in Dover, Delaware. Yeah, I can't make this stuff up, that's true. I applied for the job, got the job, have been in Dover since 1984. So I worked for a group called Delaware Guidance Services for about 2 years. Then I went into a private practice in 1987 for about 7 years. I worked a lot in the hospital when they had the program called ADAPTS, which was a psychiatric inpatient facility for adults and adolescents. I started the first adult partial program in the state of Delaware and got it approved by Blue Cross. And then People's Place had a change in clinical leadership. I was asked to apply for a job there and work with them. I did that, and 17 years later I'm still with them. And it's probably the best job I've ever had in my life. A wonderful organization, terrific support for clinicians. We have 4 clinics: Smyrna, Milford, Hillsborough, Seaford. 2 psychiatric nurse practitioners. This is called one child psychiatrist who worked for us for a while, and then her husband got transferred to North Carolina. She decided to go with him. And we do telepsychiatry. It's with TVs, and I would think, I don't know if I would like that. People love it. I don't get it because I wouldn't want to do it. But this lady's just so sweet. Everybody falls in love with her. And so adults and kids sit in our office in Milford, talk to her in North Carolina. Everything's electronic. Writing the scripts, getting the history, doing the notes, all that stuff. So that's really kind of added to our availability. And then we have another camera in Smyrna. So if you're kind of in northern Delaware and you need to see a child psychiatrist, you can go to our Smyrna office and work with you there. When I was about 7 years old, my parents got the Encyclopedia Britannica. It's now called Google. And I can remember going through that encyclopedia, and there was a page on there of an adult giving a test to this little child, and it was about determining IQ. And at the age of 7, I was fascinated that you could tell somebody's IQ by giving them a test. I'm not sure I even knew what IQ was, but it was fascinating to me that if you give somebody a test, they would somehow give you information about that you didn't otherwise know. And at that age, I said, I'm going to be a psychologist. I want to do testing. Well, life's journey, it eventually got me there, but I had other things going on. That's why I became a teacher for Yeti. When I went to Bucknell, I was certified as a school psychologist, which meant I had to give a lot of tests. Every week, you're giving tests. When I went to Penn State, I went to the counseling psych department. Nobody did tests except for Dr. Joe French, who was working on an infant IQ test. So he asked me to help him out. I would go into these homes. We would be testing kids from like 6 months to 13 months, showing them cars, trying to do things with them, etc. But I had more testing experience than anybody else in the department, including all the professors, because they didn't do that. They did therapy. I graduate, I come to Delaware, and insurance companies don't reimburse for testing. For the most part, they just don't. So about 15 years ago, somebody from the public defender's office said, we have this person that just got arrested. You're a psychologist. Could you do some testing on this person and help us with the case? And what I tell people is, I've taught at the University of Delaware, Wesley. I always tell people, always say yes to the first thing. You don't know if you're going to like it. Don't say no. So, Nancy Reagan said, just say no. I said, just say yes. I said, sure. So they had the person come over, and it was like a duck in water, because I like testing. So it was like a lot of fun, and at that time I wasn't doing any. Well, word spread that this guy likes to do testing. And that's really kind of how this started. So I've been doing this for about 15 years. I've done over about 650 evaluations. I've testified in court over 400 times. Because frankly, no one else likes to do this stuff, which is fine because I love doing this stuff. Part of being a good evaluator, though, is being able to write well and being able to speak well. So when you're on the witness stand, if you're being cross-examined and you're really struggling to articulate what you're trying to talk about, even if you're correct, it might be hard to convince a judge or the attorneys what you're doing. And because I was a teacher, I am a ham. I love getting in front of an audience that can't go anywhere and talk. And so the courtroom kind of reminds me of when I was a fourth grade teacher. Now, I don't get cologne from the judges, but I do get nice accolades periodically. So what I wanted to talk about was how important your role is in understanding what I do. Because this is a wonderful group. God bless all of you for giving your time and talent. This is very difficult because you guys are sometimes the common thread in a case. Social workers have changed, attorneys have changed, sometimes the judges change, but you're kind of the consistent theme, and it's your job to make sure you can weave all that together for some coherent whole so that people understand what's going on. Not easy. This is my email address and my phone number, and I will make these slides available to Lauren through email, so if you want copies, you can ask her for them. So first of all, we really want to talk about mental illness. Mental illness is a condition that affects a person's thinking, feeling, or mood. Conditions may affect somebody's ability to relate to others. Each person will have different experiences. Often, the public thinks mental illness is a disease of the will. So if you're weak-willed, you are more vulnerable to have a mental illness than if you are like John Wayne. That's totally not true. The brain is a very delicate organ. I'm impressed that it does as much as it does without messing up, because it doesn't take much for things to go badly. Head injuries, toxic ingestion of substances, I mean, it's just not hard. And we are learning more and more about the brain and how chemical imbalances can totally affect mood, thinking, behavior that's beyond your control. That's an example. Anybody here ever have allergies? And you take a medication that's supposed to take care of the allergies, but the medication makes you irritable? And you're not trying to be irritable, but you just can't help yourself. You're just kind of irritable. Are you talking really fast? That's not volition. That's a chemical affecting your body. Or did any of you have the experience, probably not this group, but where you drink a little bit? And when you drink, alcohol likes to travel front to back. So it affects your frontal lobes first, then it goes backwards. So frontal lobes is called social judgment. So when you say things you normally wouldn't have said, you know where the alcohol is residing. And if you're stumbling around, you know where the alcohol is. So you can kind of track where the alcohol is in that person's brain by watching them. That's not volitional. It's volitional to pick up the drink. It's not volitional to control what that drink is doing to your brain. Okay? So the difficulty here is, when we meet folks, particularly involved in court, we might have a lot of things we're thinking about. Oh, I know what this person's problem is. I know why they're doing this, and it may be one of 25 reasons why this person is doing such and such. And think about that. If we're very complicated. If we have a person, there's 20 or 25 reasons why they're doing something. What's the intervention? It may be 5 to 10 things that we need to do, not just one. And sometimes it gets so frustrating. Freud, 120 years ago, said people basically want to avoid anxiety. That's really, if you distill his theories. And so we avoid things we don't like. And sometimes we get incredibly difficult families, and we try to avoid the issue by saying, take the kids out. Let them get a fresh start. That isn't always the best solution for the family. It just feels better because it at least would end temporarily having to go forward. A mental health condition isn't the result of one event, so it's multifactorial. Genetics, environment, et cetera, et cetera. Stressful job or home life makes people more susceptible. So a group that's really susceptible to depression are nurses. And the reason why nurses are very susceptible to depression is one of the antidotes for depression is achievement. So when you have people that set goals and achieve them, that's an antidepressant behavior. Nurses' sense of achievement is yoked, yoked like oxen, is yoked to patients they can't control. So the nurse does everything he or she can to provide quality health care, and this individual is non-compliant. That nurse doesn't say, oh, I did a great job. We don't do that. The nurse says, again, I'm struggling, I'm having a hard time. Why don't you do this? Am I saying it wrong? Am I approaching it wrong? So occupations where your success rate is yoked to some other person that you can't control increase the vulnerability for depression. Do you think CASAs are in that lot? Totally. I mean, you're not yoked to a person. You're yoked to 2 parents, 5 children, 3 judges probably, 8 social workers, and 10 years of bad luck. Yeah? So you want to think about it. So what is the balance point for folks who are in professions where they are yoked to something they can't control? Find something you can. So I golf. I go out by myself. I don't even care. I sing out there. Fortunately, I don't have to play well to enjoy it. I do have buddies I play with once a week. But if I have a particularly hard day, I have golf clubs on my car right now. I walk 9 holes. So I want something that I have control. Interestingly, that's one of the reasons why I'm doing forensic work. In therapy, I've had clients I've seen for 20, 25 years. I've helped raise them. It's tough, because year in, year out, you're working with these people and they need that kind of support and help. In forensic work, I'm done. I do a test, I testify, I'm done. That just feels so much better to me than, so as I'm getting more mature, I'm doing more forensic work because I don't want to make a commitment to a human being that in 5 or 6 years I say, I'd like to kind of go into semi-retirement and I can't see you anymore. That's just not fair. So I'm trying to kind of boost the work I can do where it does have a very beginning and a very ending. We know, by the way, that behaviors and environment can change genetics. Now, is that scary or what? You know, we used to be taught, you know, the brain doesn't change much after a certain age, and genes are kind of set when the chromosomes join for the zygote. That's simply not true. You can change the gene, you can literally change the gene by certain things that happen in your life. The brain develops over time. We believe it reaches full maturity at age 25. So that means that a 4-year-old's brain isn't even close to the brain of a 16-year-old, 25-year-old. So it's being developed. So that doesn't mean it's like a smaller version of its greater self. It means the 4-year-old's brain doesn't even have some stuff that a 16-year-old brain does, that a 25-year-old brain does. And for a child to develop normally, he has to have enough energy to have his brain do that stuff. So there's a phenomenon called psychosomatic dwarfism, you might have heard of it, where if kids are stressed enough, they will stop growing because all the energy is to the brain to help it develop. And when you bring those children out of a toxic or traumatic environment, they get back to their growth cycle. They will literally stop growing. Another example is if you traumatize children before the age of 6, severe trauma, we talk about frontal lobes, that's the most advanced part of our brain. Part of that won't develop because there's a critical time for it to develop, and if you pass that critical time, it doesn't develop. What's the part that's developing when you're 4, 5, 6? Impulse control, emotional control, the beginning of judgment. Holy cow. Now you've got a 14-year-old who has problems with impulse control. So why? Because that part may never have developed in their brain. So if they were in an environment where there was a lot of trauma or environmental toxins, etc., that part doesn't get involved. Now, this is the good news. Our brains are so developed that we can use inner dialogue to substitute for changes in the brain functionality. So we can teach kids to have an inner dialogue that gives them similar control to what would have happened naturally. It's not the same. So when it occurs naturally, it feels natural to the child. So if you have a normal developing 4-year-old when they're 14 or 15, they have some impulse control problems, but they kind of put on the brakes. They don't have to talk to themselves about it. But we can teach kids that don't have that to talk to themselves to substitute for what they missed in that development. They did a study one time. They were looking at veterans from the Vietnam War and who developed PTSD and who did not. So post-traumatic stress disorder is a phenomena that we used to call shell shock during the Civil War, and it was called shell shock because the belief from the medical doctors was if you stood too close to a cannon, and that cannon went off, it would rattle your brain, and you would get post-traumatic stress disorder. Freud said, that's crap. PTSD is because of unresolved neurotic issues with your family. You get overwhelmed and you can't integrate the trauma. And we've now found out he was wrong, and shell shock is a pretty close model for what probably really happens. So when we talk about TBI, traumatic brain injury, with these soldiers from Iraq and Afghanistan, that's what's going on. Their brains are getting so rattled. If you saw the movie Concussion, same thing with football players. Post-traumatic stress TBI, that's what's going on. And my point was, study. So they want to know, is there a connection between Vietnam vets that get PTSD and those that don't? The theory was these vets that had great childhoods probably were so vulnerable when they got into Vietnam to all this horrible stuff that they developed PTSD. And what they found was that's absolutely wrong. It was the veterans who had traumatic childhoods that became more easily overwhelmed in Vietnam because they didn't have those skills to bounce back and and they handle things and do cope, okay? 1 in 5 adults experiences a mental health condition every year. Look around the room, there was 41 people, I think, that signed up, okay? 1 in 17 lives with a serious mental illness such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. So it is a wave that affects family, friends. I work a lot with families where they have an adult child that has a developmental disability, chronic condition, not many resources in the United States. Delaware is actually one of the better states for it, but these people are really struggling to provide care for their adult children. And the adult children have their own issues about wanting to be independent. They really can't because of developmental issues, etc. Half of mental health conditions begin by age 14. We're talking about, these are brain injuries. 75% of mental health conditions develop by age 24. So sometimes other things in our lives mimic mental health issues. What's an example? Bipolar disorder, which is a very serious mental illness, has a genetic loading. So it's probable that when you're born, you have a vulnerability to it. Whether those genes get expressed or not might depend on a number of factors: your environment, parents, your experiences in life, etc. So there's like this tipping point. This is what we think. And if it tips over, you'll develop the bipolar disorder, and if it doesn't, you might not. You might still have some other things. You might be kind of more irritable than the average bear, but bipolar is much more serious than that. So think about it. So 4 and 5-year-olds may have the seeds of a bipolar disorder going on. But the symptoms they're showing are sometimes misdiagnosed as oppositional defiant disorder or ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So when you read the records of a lot of adults that are finally diagnosed with bipolar, and you read their childhood records, it's like more than 50% of the time they have been diagnosed with ADHD or ODD. That's not necessarily an error on the doctor's part, because you can't tell. When a kid's 6, you base a diagnosis on the symptoms they're expressing, and they don't always express the symptoms consistent with bipolar, but that's kind of like what the seeds of it look like. Kids that can't pay attention, they're aggressive, they don't listen to you, that type of thing. Yeah, as I'm talking, by the way, if you have questions, please ask, because if you wait till the end, I'll forget. So what's a forensic mental health evaluation? Forensic means it's going to court. So I do mental health evaluations, psychological evaluations. In a psychological evaluation, I'm doing it for your benefit. You want to know something about yourself. You have concerns about your therapy isn't going very well. So that's a confidential report. It's handed to you. I discuss everything with you. It goes nowhere else unless you sign a release. A forensic evaluation means it's going to court. So I actually have people sign a document when they see me, a forensic informed consent contract that says, you don't own this report. In fact, nothing in here is confidential. I'm going to interview you, administer some tests, I'm writing a report. The report goes to DFS, their attorney, your attorney, the courts. That's the standard. If you don't like that, that's fine, but then I won't see you. I've never had anyone refuse. Sometimes they say afterwards, I really don't get a report. No, you don't get a copy of this. It's your attorney will get a copy, and I'm sure they're going to share with you. And they do all the time. I see my reports all over the place. So, but you have to warn them. The other thing is that for forensic evaluations, you use what are called experts. So an expert means that somebody has claimed that they have done more studying or have more experiences than the average bear in a certain area. So I said before, when I went to Penn State, I had more experience in testing than most of the profs. Was I an expert in testing? Nah, because if you compare me to the clinical psych department, that's kind of what they were doing. I'm an expert in terms of the continuing ed that I've had, the supervision I've had, the amount of work in the court, et cetera, that has separated me from other psychologists in Delaware. So if you randomly pick a psychologist in Delaware, they're doing wonderful work, but if you said, how many times have you done a forensic eval? Most of them will say 0. I've done 600. How many times have you testified in court? You can testify in court as an expert witness or as a fact finder, as a, I don't know what you would call a regular witness. If I see an auto accident and the policeman says, I'm going to subpoena you in court as a witness, that's not an expert. That's just this person watching. Okay? I've testified in 30 years 3 times as a non-expert. As a therapist, I hate it. It's the wrong thing to do. I have an obligation to maintain confidentiality with the client. but I don't want to go to jail. So if I get a subpoena and a judge says you must be here, I do that. But that's the big difference. How many times have I testified as an expert? 3 in 30 years. How many times as a forensic over 450? So when we talk about the tests I use, we're really talking about measurement issues. So norms, when I get information about you, what am I going to compare that to? And does it make a difference? So if I give you a test, does it matter if you're a male or a female? If I give you a test, does it matter what race you belong to? If I give you a test, does it matter your age? Well, some tests, yes. Some tests, no. So you have to know, when you get results, who am I comparing this to? So if I give you a test, and I look at your results, for those to be valid, I can either say, this is what so-and-so thinks of themselves. It's an N of 1. Is that valid, reliable? I don't know. If I did the test tomorrow, would they do the same thing? I don't know. But what if I could say, I can compare this person's results